Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. My ex, Sophia, and I split up 4 years ago, soon after our twins were born. We'd barely been dating for approximately 11 months when she discovered she was pregnant. We both panicked and decided to try to make it work for the sake of the kids, assuming that the relationship would magically fall into place because of the family aspect of it. I'll confess that we weren't quite compatible from the beginning. There were some enjoyable moments, but it was not a profound, long-lasting bond. When she became pregnant, I hoped we could persevere and make it work, but we were about as compatible as chalk and cheese. Regardless, for the sake of the kids, we gave it our all. Things were okay for a while, just the normal arguments, but we co-parented effectively enough to keep things from getting out of hand. We weren't fighting. Then Sophia met someone new. She saw him as someone she might have a future with, and I understood. She wanted a new start, something different from what we had. She was open about it, and we both felt that separating was the best choice. I can't say I was devastated since the relationship wasn't strong to begin with. However, we terminated things as graciously as possible. Following that, we settled into a rhythm of co-parenting. Things went as well as they could while raising children in different houses. We divided our time equitably, kept communication focused on the kids, and co-parented well. We didn't want the twins to feel any strain, so we worked very hard to make it work. The children spent time with both of us, and there was no child support since we shared everything equally. Sophia met her now husband roughly 4 years after our separation. However, he was not the person she began seeing directly after we separated. He was someone new. The fascinating thing was that he had a daughter the same age as our twins. Sophia told me about him and how serious they were becoming. I wanted to support it for the children's sake, to make things simpler for them. I was okay with the thought of my twins having another father figure around. But things began to change when Sophia mentioned including her stepdaughter in the same way we engaged our kids in everything. She casually commented that it would be good to do activities as a large family. At first, it was innocent enough. I assumed she was just attempting to integrate the families, but it began to feel uncomfortable when she suggested I treat her stepdaughter as if she were my own. Let me be clear, I have nothing against her stepdaughter, she is just a child caught in the midst of all this. But Sophia appeared to believe that since we were all linked by the twins, I was bound to include her stepdaughter in every activity or excursion I planned with my children. When we initially spoke about it, I informed her that, although I understood her want to involve everyone, it was not my obligation to behave as a father to her new husband's child. Sophia continued pushing the notion, even though I was already busy being a good father to my twins. I tried not to get irritated. It's difficult co-parenting, balancing your family's demands while maintaining peace with an ex and their new spouse, but the expectations simply kept increasing. Things took a turn when she began expecting me to watch her stepdaughter whenever I had twins. If I booked a weekend activity with my kids, she'd phone to see if I could bring along her stepdaughter. I didn't mind it sometimes, but it became an expectation. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind helping out on occasion, but I didn't sign up to be a third parent to her husband's child. Honestly, I didn't see how that was fair to me or my own children. After a time, I discovered that whenever I planned anything special for my twins, it always ended up being about all of the other kids in her family. It seemed like I wasn't allowed to spend time alone with my own children anymore, and if I purchased presents or arranged surprise vacations, I'd hear about how unfair it was that her stepdaughter wasn't involved in the same manner. She even became furious once because I did not spend as much money on a present for her stepdaughter as I did for our twins. I had to draw the line somewhere, so I chose to devote my time and resources to my twins. I conveyed this to her, and as expected, it did not go down well. She branded me selfish and accused me of failing to support her whole family. She wanted to have a large mixed family, but I had not agreed to this. I told her that, although I wanted my twins to feel like they belonged, I didn't have to treat other children the same way. She wasn't pleased, but we were able to keep things respectful enough to continue co-parenting. Since that chat, we have been parallel parenting rather than co-parenting, if that makes sense. We spend much of our time with the kids on our own and seldom do things as a large family. We don't make plans together or mix the kids from her home and mine. It simplifies things and it allows me to concentrate on my own children without having to worry about other people's expectations. But she'll bring it up every now and again, trying to make me feel bad for not stepping in to help raise all of the children under her roof. Her family's condition has only become more difficult over time. She and her husband had a kid together, and they subsequently took in her husband's nephew, so she now has my twins, their stepsister, a step-cousin, and a half-sister. Sophia attempts to bring everyone together as one happy family, but I've made it obvious that my job is limited to my children. So, every time I think we've reached a place where everything is resolved, something else pops up. But I've maintained my limits, and I don't believe it's unfair to concentrate on the two children who are really my. It's one thing to support her actions as a mother, it's quite another to be expected to raise everyone under her house. Now, fast ahead a little bit, and here is when everything began to go wrong. With Sophia's family growing, it's becoming more difficult for me to maintain my limits. At first, we were able to strike a balance in which I was doing my part as a father without becoming overly involved in her new family situation, but as time passed, Sophia's expectations grew, and it seemed like every few months there was something new she wanted me to help with, whether it was her stepdaughter, her husband's nephew, or their baby together. It felt as if they were adding layers, and I was expected to bear part of the load. Then came the entire school trip thing. My children attend a tiny school with mixed-age classes. This also puts them in the same class as their stepsister and step-cousin, which is good. It's a little unique, but it works for the school and does not annoy me. What I didn't anticipate was that it would escalate into a major disagreement with Sophia and her husband about what I was supposed to pay for. This wasn't your average field trip, it was a major occasion for the kids. The school was organizing a trip to an interactive museum with workshops and hands-on learning, which sounded fantastic. The vacation was expensive, but my twins were really eager, and it seemed like something that would make wonderful memories for them. I could afford it, so I paid for them. I mentioned it to Sophia, expecting her to be pleased that the twins were receiving this opportunity, but when I brought it up, she became very silent and flatly said that if the other kids couldn't attend, it would be unfair. At first, I assumed she was kidding. There's no way she was expecting me to pay for the other two, right? But, no, she was completely serious. She said that it was not appropriate for my children to attend this luxury vacation if her other children were unable to do so. I attempted to remain cool and informed her that I was paying for my twins since they were my duty. I even offered that she and her husband fundraise or save money for the other children if it was so essential to them. But then she struck me with the think about how they'll feel watching your kids go while they stay behind a line. She said that if the kids didn't all have the same experience, the whole home would come apart, which sparked a heated debate. Then her husband interjects, claiming it's unjust to treat the children differently. Now, I support fairness, but there is a limit. His stepdaughter and nephew aren't my duty, and I'm not wealthy, so I questioned him straight up, why is it my obligation to pay for all of the children in your household? He merely gave me a look as if I was the one being selfish. Then he goes on a tirade about how they are all meant to be siblings and how I am ruining their family. Look, I understand that no child likes to be excluded, but they must eventually accept that I am not their father. Sophia took the choice to bring in these more children, and she now has a whole new family structure. That's her decision, but I'm not going to be guilted into paying for every child she takes in. What truly irritated me was when they made it seem like I was being harsh. They said that this would harm the children's relationships and that if our twins and their stepsister drifted apart as a result, it would be my responsibility. I mean, come on, I'm just a dad trying to do something good for my kids, and it's turned into this huge family drama about what I'm not doing for kids who aren't even my own. So I said, look, I don't think it's fair to expect me to cover everyone's expenses. This vacation is a pleasure for our twins, it coincides with my time with them, and I want them to go. I cannot see how that is unfair to anybody. But Sophia just kept talking, saying that if our twins attend and the other kids don't, they'll feel like they are being treated as inferior, and I should be concerned about that. Her spouse even attempted to promote family harmony, saying that if the children grow up resenting one another, it would be my responsibility. At that time, I was honestly over it. This is not about family unity, it is about them attempting to make their financial decisions my concern. It's not like they are suffering, they have good employment. If this trip is important to them, they can make it happen without depending on me. I am not responsible for extending my funds to compensate for what they are unable or unwilling to accomplish. The whole debate went in circles. They continued telling me how unjust it was and how I should think about the family, but I stayed firm. I told them it wasn't my fault they couldn't afford to send the other kids, and I wasn't going to be guilted into paying for it. That's where we left it, but I could tell by Sophia's expression that this wasn't over. To be honest, I left the talk frustrated and perplexed. I attempted to explain that I wasn't responsible for all of her family's children, but they simply didn't listen. My attention on my own children had become a problem, and I was being portrayed as the villain in their family drama. It's very exhausting. I simply wanted to do something nice for my twins, and now there's this huge problem of justice and family unity. It seems like I'm on a tightrope, and every action might trigger another debate. All I wanted was to provide a nice experience for my children, but unfortunately it is too much to ask. So, after the big debate over the school trip, I assumed everything was over, at least for the time being. I believed I had made it obvious that I would not be paying for all of the children, and I hoped Sophia and her husband would just drop it. But they weren't going to let it go without another round. What occurred next caught me totally off surprise. Sophia texted me a few days after our dispute over the trip, stating she wanted to meet up to speak. I knew this wasn't going to be a nice conversation, but I decided it was best to get it over with than to keep going back and forth by text. I agreed, and we scheduled a meeting in a little restaurant roughly midway between our locations. She arrived, and I knew straight immediately this wasn't going to be a fast conversation. She had that serious expression on her face that indicated she had prepared what she was about to say. She sat down and quickly began, "I don't think you're understanding the situation." I was thinking, I think I get it just fine, I'm paying for my kids, that's all, but I let her speak. She went on to say that I needed to see the broader picture and that this was more than just a school trip. It was about establishing a precedent for how we would handle future situations. I believe she thought if she presented it as a large family concept, I'd feel compelled to agree. Then she began to explain that this trip was only one example, and that in the future, there will be additional activities, events, and maybe even family vacations, and we needed to be on the same page about treating all of the kids equally. I could not believe it. I was wondering, is she really requesting that I pay for all of her children's family trips now? But I simply listened, trying not to react too strongly since I knew that getting too hot would just make everything worse. Then she brings up the fairness issue again, claiming that if my children get to do these activities but others do not, it would breed animosity. She even went so far as to imply that it may harm the children's relationships with one another, that they would grow up feeling unequal and torn apart. I was sat there thinking, they are already separate kids from different homes, living different lives. Why did this suddenly become my issue to solve? When she ended, I attempted to remain cool and reminded her that although I understood her desire for all of the children to feel equal, they were not my children and were not under my care. I reminded her that we had been practicing parallel parenting for a while, she handles things on her end, and I manage them on mine. However, it seems that this was no longer enough. That's when she revealed the true kicker. If you really cared about the kids' well-being, you'd want to support the whole family, not just your kids, she told me. She continued saying how I needed to demonstrate good faith by standing up for the other kids as well. I nearly laughed out loud because it seemed so ridiculous. When did it become necessary to assist my children as well as the children of others? At that time, I felt myself losing it. I told her, look, I care about my children's well-being. That is why I am prepared to do these things for them, but I will not allow you to guilt-trip me into paying for children who are not mine. She didn't like it one bit. She became defensive, saying I was being selfish and not considering how this would harm the kids in the long term. I said, how is it selfish to just care about my own children? You made the decision to bring these more children into your family. That's not on me. Then her husband appeared. I'm not sure whether she expected him to simply happen by, but he was there, strolling up to our table. He hardly recognized me and walked directly to Sophia, like if he was ready to rescue the day or something. He sits down and instantly begins in on me, as if he has been waiting for this time. He responds, I don't believe you are being fair. We are meant to be building a family here, and your actions are throwing up barriers. I simply looked at him for a second, wondering if he really expected I'd get into this whole we are all family thing when it came to my money. So I told him straight out, I am here to support my twins, that is what I signed up for. You can't simply expect me to pretend all these other kids are my financially. Then he hits me with, well, if the kids start hating one another, that's your fault. You're the one causing division. That set me off. I reminded him, you're the one pushing for me to play dad to children who aren't mine. I'm not the one making things difficult. I just want to do the right thing for my children, that's all. I didn't care if he thought I was frigid at that time. I felt like they were both ganging up on me, making me feel like the bad person just for having limits. Following that, things heated up a little. Sophia began to suggest that if the kids grow up resenting one another, it would be because I did not care enough to support their family's ideal. I couldn't believe what I heard. I told her, if that's the case, maybe you and your husband need to figure out a way to deal with it, but don't blame it all on me. By this time, others in the restaurant were giving us stares, but I didn't mind. I was tired up with being made to feel like the bad guy in this circumstance. I only wanted to do something nice for my kids, but it turned into a huge problem over what I owed her home. I eventually stood up and said, look, I've done my bit. My attention is on my twins, and that will not change. If you want things to be equal, maybe you should look at what you guys are doing rather than what I am doing. But I'm done being the bad guy here. With that, I walked out, feeling both frustrated and relieved. It was evident to me that no matter what I said, they wouldn't understand. As I walked away, I could still feel their gaze on me, as if they were waiting for me to give in and agree to their requirements. But by that moment, I was done. I'd established my limits, and I wasn't going to let them force me into anything I hadn't agreed to. It's one thing to want your children to feel like they are part of a family, it's another to ask someone else to pay for it. After that catastrophe of a talk at the restaurant, I hoped things would calm down. I expected Sophia and her husband to understand and move on after the dinner incident, but I should have known better. Things did not just go away, rather, they deteriorated. A few days later, I began receiving lengthy messages from her family members. It began with her sister, who had always been cool and remained out of our problems, but now she was emailing me about how essential it was for the kids to feel like one big family. She said things like, if you really cared about your kids' happiness, you'd be willing to do this for them. It seemed like she was indicating that I was doing something wrong just because I didn't want to pay for her sister's stepchildren. I tried to ignore it, thinking she'd let it go, but the texts kept coming, and they weren't any nicer. What began as mild recommendations rapidly escalated into direct charges. I was suddenly selfish, stingy, and unconcerned about the wider picture. They behaved as if I was ripping up a lovely family just because I refused to sponsor a vacation for 2 children who were not mine. Her family seems to regard it as if I had declared war on them all for merely putting a limit. Then things got worse. Sophia's mother decided to phone me. I hadn't talked to her in a while, so I was shocked to see her name come up. I assumed she wanted to chat about the twins or have a relaxed conversation, but no. This call was something else completely. She launched right into a spiel on how things should be. She said that if I simply paid for all of the kids, it wouldn't be a problem. She told me I should consider how much better things would be if I spent more time with all of the kids. My tolerance was becoming thin, but I said, with all due respect, those children are not my responsibility. I'm doing right by my own children, and that's what I signed up for. She continuing, saying things like, a good man steps up and takes care of the whole family, not just his own. I was taken aback. I attempted to explain that, although I wanted the best for my twins, I did not have to financially support every child Sophia brought into the family. I told her I'm not going to feel bad for taking care of my own kids and setting boundaries, but she didn't seem to hear me. The argument went worse from there, with her repeating herself and playing the guilt card hard, talking about how it was my responsibility as a parent and how the kids would suffer. By the conclusion of the call, I was finished. I calmly concluded the talk after telling her that we would not be able to agree. But the pressure did not subside. Over the following week or two, it seemed like they were uniting the whole family against me. Sophia's brother even made a passive-aggressive remark on one of my social media postings about becoming a father. He added, real dads support their families no matter what. It was evident he was not simply referring to my children. I did not even react, I just removed the remark and went on. But I'm not going to lie, that bothered me. I was trying my best for my twins, yet nonetheless I was being portrayed as the evil person in their eyes. One day, after dropping the kids off at daycare, I was returning to my vehicle when Sophia's husband caught up with me. He did not welcome me or make light chat. He simply got right into it, saying, "You know, you're hurting the kids with this." I was taken aback. I thought we had previously discussed this, but he obviously wasn't done. He began to complain about how my choice not to pay for all of the children was causing schisms among the siblings and that I needed to be more attentive of the family dynamics. I informed him, "I'm not harming anybody. I am taking care of my children. They aren't the ones battling here." But he wouldn't let it go. He continued saying that everyone in the family felt I was being unjust and that it was only a matter of time until the kids picked up on it and began resenting each other. It seemed like he was putting the burden of the family's happiness on my shoulders, and I wasn't having it. I informed him, "Your family's view does not affect my obligations. I'm not their father. I'm here for my kids, and that won't change." At that moment, I wasn't sure what more to say. No matter what I did, they always saw me as the villain in their family drama. That night, I sat down, attempting to figure out how we came to this place. All I wanted to do was care for my children and provide them with positive experiences, but I was being portrayed as a cold-hearted man who did not value family unity. It was as if they couldn't see the distinction between what was fair and what was not. I ended up telling a few close friends about it. They couldn't believe how much pressure Sophia's family placed on me. One of my friends remarked that if they were so worried about the kids missing out, they should all pitch in and pay for the trip themselves. It made me giggle, but it was also irritating. It seemed like her whole family had decided I was required to be a full-time mom to children who weren't mine, and for what? Just to preserve the peace with folks who obviously didn't respect my boundaries. The whole experience left a terrible taste in my mouth. I was fed up with receiving messages and phone calls from different family members all calling the same number. It seemed like they had built up the impression that I owed them something and they weren't going to let go until I succumbed. By the end of the week, I understood that attempting to argue with them was futile. They didn't want an explanation, they wanted me to comply. I promised myself I wouldn't let them wear me down. My children are my duty, and I was not about to let this extended family guilt trip alter that. It's weird to think that all of this began with me attempting to pay for my child's school trip and has now escalated into a conflict about who is doing enough for the whole family. They may not like it, but I understand where I stand. After a week of non-stop texts, unsolicited counsel, and guilt trips from Sophia's relatives, I decided it was time to set hard limits and adhere to them, no exceptions. By that moment, I was finished. It was evident to me that no matter how much I explained, they wouldn't comprehend. They were all obsessed with the concept of having a large happy family, and I seemed to be the only one standing in their way since I refused to pay for every new child they added to their home. The first thing I did was tell my twins about the approaching vacation. I wanted to make sure they were still thrilled and didn't feel weird due to the turmoil. I did not want them to feel guilty or accountable for anything. I kept it simple and told them, "Hey, I'm really looking forward to this trip for you guys, and I want you to know that this is something special for just the two of you." I didn't get into the complicated details, but I wanted them to realize that it was all right for them to do something just for themselves. They both seemed relieved. They did pick up on some tension, kids often do, but they seemed joyful and thrilled about the trip. I could see they didn't feel horrible about it, which took a great weight off my shoulders. I wanted children to understand that they deserved good experiences without feeling responsible for anybody else. With that established, I realized I wanted to establish a clear, solid limit with Sophia and her family, not just a hazy, "I'm only paying for my kids" sort of border, but a definite line they'd recognize. So I phoned Sophia. I remained cool and direct because I did not want this to develop into another lengthy, drawn-out debate. I simply told her, "Look, my responsibility as a parent is to support my kids. I am here for them and I am doing all I can to provide them with positive experiences, but it does not extend to other children who are not my own. I appreciate your decisions and your family, but my financial responsibilities stop with my twins." Sophia was understandably disappointed. She instantly focused on how the other kids would react and how it was unfair for siblings to have different experiences. I allowed her to speak, but as soon as she began down the guilt trip route again, I stopped her. I said, I understand how you feel, but this is my final choice. I'm not going to pay for any other bills other than our twins. If you want to work anything out for your family, it is up to you, but you must stop putting pressure on me. There was quiet for a few seconds and I could see she was upset, but I wasn't going to back down. I could almost feel her preparing to make one more effort, but she must have understood it wouldn't work. She ended up saying something like, "Fine, I guess you've made your choice," in a tone that was obviously intended to make me feel terrible, but I didn't. At that time, I was more relieved than anything else. I had finished explaining myself. After then, everything calmed down. There would be no more strange texts from her relatives or passive-aggressive comments, only quiet. It was strange, but it was nice to finally have some peace. I believe they ultimately understood I was not going to give in to their demands and they had to accept it. In the weeks preceding up to the trip, I made an effort to spend extra time with the twins, doing ordinary, everyday activities to keep everything grounded. We ate, went to the park, and watched movies as normal. I wanted kids to feel safe and cheerful, not caught up in whatever problems the adults were dealing with. To be honest, it was pleasant to concentrate just on them without any additional drama. Then the day of the excursion arrived. I left them off at school that morning and they were all grins and eager to go. It was wonderful to see them so joyful after what had transpired. As they dashed off to join their pals, I felt a strong feeling of accomplishment. It wasn't about pleasing everyone or going above and above for those who didn't appreciate it. It was about providing my children the best I could and teaching them that it is okay to establish limits. Here's the kicker, Sophia called me the day following the trip. I expected a sarcastic or passive-aggressive response, but she just inquired whether the kids had fun. I informed her they did, but I kept it brief to avoid reopening past problems. But then she astonished me. She congratulated me for standing up for what I considered to be right. She added, "I didn't agree with you, but I respect that you stood up for yourself and your kids." I was taken aback. I wasn't expecting her to come around, yet there she was. It wasn't an apology, but it seemed like an admission that maybe I wasn't the evil they'd represented me to be. Since then, things have been considerably more tranquil. I don't hear anything from her family anymore, and I believe we've achieved a new level of understanding. We don't always agree, but we've both embraced our responsibilities in the children's lives, and I believe it's made me a better father. Now I'm not second-guessing every action, thinking how it will damage her family. I'm only thinking about what's best for my twins. In the end, the whole event taught me something significant. Setting boundaries is more than simply saying no to others, it is also about saying yes to my own peace of mind. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own family without feeling terrible about it. If others don't understand, it's their issue, not mine. So, everything are going well right now. The twins are pleased, as am I, and it seems like we are finally moving ahead without all of the extra baggage. I've made it obvious where I stand, and I believe Sophia and her husband have grown to appreciate that. It's not ideal, and I'm sure there will be bumps along the way, but at least now I know I can stand firm and make choices that are best for my family without getting caught up in everyone else's expectations. A few weeks after things had calmed down, I assumed I had heard the last of the requests. But then Sophia struck me with something fresh. She began discussing the twins' living arrangement at her house, claiming that they did not have the same level of comfort as they had with me. I assumed she was simply ranting, but then she hinted that I should do something about it. It turned out that she wanted me to purchase a home for them rather than for myself. She said that it was unfair for the children to have to go between two very different living conditions and that it may harm their self-esteem if they felt inadequate in her home. I was trying to figure out whether she was serious, and she was quite serious. She really wanted me to build a second home for the kids to reside in while they were with her, so she could live there as well, all at my cost. I tried to remain cool, but I had to ask, how does that make sense? You already have a home. She complained about how their house was too tiny for a family her size and how it was impacting the children's mental health. She was talking about equal standards, as if I was required to compensate for every decision she'd made since we broke up. When I informed her it wasn't going to happen, she used every guilt trip in the book. She asked, "Don't you want the kids to be as comfortable in my house as they are with you?" It's unjust that I'm not prepared to pay for their whole living experience. She responded as if I were a cold-hearted jerk for refusing to purchase her family a new home. At this moment, I was finished. I assured her, the twins have everything they need at your house. If you believe they need a larger home, you and your spouse can manage it. I'm not in charge of improving your house. There was a short hesitation before she shot back, well, if the kids end up feeling like they have a real home only with you, that'll be on you. I simply shook my head, and the argument ended there. I'm not sure how she felt this was a legitimate request. I want the best for my children, but that doesn't mean I'm giving her a whole new lifestyle. I suppose there is no limit to what she will ask for, but at least I understand now. I've drawn the line and refused to budge. After Sophia's latest demand for a second home, I felt I couldn't let this situation go without taking some action. I'd previously told her where I stood, but I wanted to make sure I had real evidence in case things went further. So I decided to capture our talk. I didn't want to use it straight immediately, but I decided I should cover my bases. I set my phone to record as she began her preposterous request, and I tried to remain cool and collected, just like I had in our previous conversations. Within a week, she phoned again, but this time she was more forceful. But my voice remained steady. Sophia, I said, this does not make sense. You already own a house. If you're not satisfied with it, that's your fault, not mine. I am not accountable for improving your whole life. It's not my responsibility if your spouse doesn't make much money. She pushed back forcefully, hoping to shame me into complying. It's not just for me, she said. This is for the kids. Don't you care about their well-being? They need stability, which I can't supply until I have a larger home for them to reside in. I could feel my blood boiling, but I remained concentrated. Do you agree that you cannot raise my children in that house? I said strongly. I won't purchase you a new home. That is not occurring. This conversation is over. I didn't say anything more after that. I realized I needed to take action. A few days later, I spoke with a lawyer. I wanted to be sure I was completely prepared to defend my children. The lawyer listened to my side of the story, and then we spoke about how to address this problem, particularly given Sophia's continual demands and the damage they were having on my kids. We need to gather proof, my lawyer urged. Not only are Sophia's demands excessive, but she and her husband are also capable of providing a stable home for your children. If you have any documented occurrences or exchanges like these, they might be useful in court. I took the attorney's recommendations seriously. I collected all communications, emails, and texts in which Sophia made similar requests. I also supplied documentation of how she had been attempting to guilt-trip me for years, particularly over financial responsibility for the children. I also chronicled additional occasions in which I was concerned about Sophia and her husband's capacity to address the twins' emotional and financial needs. It wasn't long before the custody case was filed in court. When the hearing day finally came, I was ready. I had the recordings, messages, and papers organized. My lawyer presented everything in a precise, structured manner, demonstrating how Sophia had been pressing me for financial contributions beyond my responsibilities as a parent. We also emphasized Sophia and her husband's precarious living circumstances, which included ongoing financial challenges and their history of making bad judgments that harmed the children's well-being. Sophia, of course, fought back. She stepped up in court with a sorrowful look, attempting to portray herself as a worried mother. Your Honor, she continued, I've been doing all I can to provide a wonderful life for my children, but my ex-husband refuses to assist. How can people feel safe while compelled to live in two different worlds? I'm doing all I can to improve their lives, but he won't help us. The judge listened attentively yet remained unconcerned. Miss Sophia, your household's financial and mental stability is clearly doubtful. You've put unreasonable demands on your ex-husband, and we've seen evidence of efforts to coerce him into maintaining your home beyond your duties. It is clear that your ex-husband has created a more stable and safe home for the children. Sophia's face twisted with annoyance as she said, but they need to feel protected. They deserve to be as comfortable in my home as they are with him. It is not fair. The judge quickly responded, you're asking for more than you should anticipate from your ex-husband. You must recognize that your obligations as a parent are your own. Your ex has said that he is prepared to financially support the children, but you are asking for more than he is responsible for. The judge then turned to look at my twins, who were sitting calmly in the courtroom. The judge inquired, "How do you feel about your living situation? Do you like your father's home or your mother's?" Despite their nervousness, the twins provided honest replies. "I feel happy with Dad," my kid stated. "Being's enjoyable and he makes sure we're all right." My daughter agreed, adding, "I like being at Dad's too. We get to do stuff together and it seems like a safe environment." The judge turned back to Sophia, unimpressed. "It seems that your children are prospering in their father's care and have indicated no desire for a changed living environment. I also don't see any indication that you can give the same degree of stability for them right now." Sophia made one last attempt, "But they need me. I'm their mother." The judge answered calmly, "I realize that, Miss Sophia, but your actions have shown a history of placing financial burden on your ex-husband while he has provided a more stable, supportive home for the children. It is in their best interests to be with their father." The judge banged his gavel down. "The children will remain in their father's custody. Mr. Henderson's financial responsibilities will be limited to what he has already committed to." Sophia's face plummeted and she stood for a while, astonished. She didn't say anything when she sat down, but I could feel the weight fall off my shoulders. The choice has been made. The twins were living with me where they felt comfortable and I didn't have to second-guess every decision I made. As I exited the courthouse, I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it seemed like the correct option. I was not going to allow anybody tell me what was best for my children, particularly because their well-being was already being taken care of. Sophia's situation began to crumble a few months following the court hearing. It didn't take long until the flaws in her marriage were too obvious to ignore. She had always been focused on convincing me to support her and her family, but now it was her own husband who was wreaking havoc in her life. Sophia found him cheating on her, and when she questioned him about it, the situation became violent. One evening, Sophia found texts on her husband's phone that confirmed her darkest fears. She approached him in the living room and demanded explanations. "How could you treat me like way after all I've done for you? For us?" she yelled, holding the phone in front of his face. Her irate spouse said nothing at first. Then, without warning, he rushed at her. "Do you think you're better than me? You don't know what I've gone through," he yelled, ripping the phone from her grasp and slamming her back into the wall. His rage grew swiftly and before long, he was physically abusing her, throwing punches and knocking her to the ground. Sophia hardly had time to respond. She attempted to telephone for assistance, but he swiftly grabbed the phone from her and shattered it. The assault was overpowering, leaving Sophia with bruises and wounds all over her face and body. He eventually rushed out of the home, leaving her bloodied and bruised on the floor. Sophia ended up in the hospital that night, and when police came, her husband was detained for assault. The cops arrested him and accused him with domestic violence. Sophia had experienced a nightmare, and it seemed like her whole existence was collapsing around her. She was unsettled, afraid, and confused about her future. Sophia filed for divorce a few weeks later, and the process proceeded easily. Her husband was in prison, and she was supported by her family. She moved back in with her mother, hoping to recuperate from the stress of the previous several months. Sophia contacted me shortly after the divorce was completed. One evening, I received an unexpected call. Sophia's name appeared on the caller ID. I expected something like this, but I wasn't prepared for the torrent of emotions that returned. I picked up the phone, trying to remain calm. "Hey," she replied quietly, sounding exhausted and vulnerable. "I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I really need to talk to you. My marriage has been so screwed up. I do not know what to do. Can you take me back? I've learnt a lot, and I now see how badly I screwed up with you. You're the only one who ever really understood me. I need you back." I felt a flood of fury rush over me. The wrath, the guilt, the manipulation, all of the things she'd done to entice me back into her life when we were still married. But suddenly things were different. She was damaged and vulnerable, but I'd moved on. I had my children, peace of mind, and a clear set of priorities. "Sophia," I continued, my voice calm but forceful, "I'm not doing this. You had a chance. We've gone through so much, and I can't simply undo the harm you've caused. You've injured me, the kids, and done things that can't be changed. I am not going back to it. You need to figure out your life, and I am no longer a part of it. I'm sorry, but I'm not returning. There was a lengthy pause on the other end of the telephone. I could hear her deep breathing, the sound of her irritation and disappointment seeping through. I don't expect you to forgive me, she eventually said, her voice low. I don't know where to turn. I've made many errors and now I'm left with nothing. Can't you just give me another chance? I shook my head, but she couldn't see it. I can't, Sophia. I have been there. You've already shown who you really are, and I've learnt my lesson. It's time for you to discover yours. I'm no longer your backup. I've moved on, and so should you. I hung up the phone. It was not easy, but it was the correct thing to do. I couldn't return to a lady who had caused so much misery in my life and that of my children. She'd made her decisions and now she had to deal with the repercussions. I was beyond being a part of her drama. I just needed to concentrate on my family. After a few weeks, I did not hear from her again. I had no idea what was going on in her life, and I honestly didn't care. I had finally drawn the line, and I was not going to allow anybody drag me back into their poisonous mess. Sophia needed to confront her reality, and I was determined to keep moving ahead for the sake of my children and myself. Months passed without hearing from Sophia, and life gradually resumed its new pattern. The twins and I felt more at ease than we had in years. There were less distractions, fewer calls and texts from Sophia's relatives, and a great deal less emotional turbulence. We spent time doing what we enjoyed, going to the park, seeing movies on weekends, and having our regular dinner dates. It wasn't ideal, but it was peaceful, and it was just what I needed after a long period. One day, I brought the twins to the zoo. We spent the day laughing, chatting, and exploring. It wasn't anything spectacular, yet it met all of their needs. As we went around the zoo, my kid looked at me, his expression filled with awe. Dad, I love it when it's just you and me. It's just you, me, and her, he added, referring to his sister. His comments were simple yet meaningful. I grinned and quickly ruffled his hair. I adore it too, buddy. I am glad you are happy, I said. He returned his gaze to the animals, satisfied with the present moment. Those days reminded me of why I was doing all I was doing, to ensure that they had a secure, happy childhood devoid of the turmoil that had characterized so much of my previous relationship with Sophia. Even though Sophia had receded from the foreground of my life, I couldn't ignore the notion that this wasn't quite finished. I had established my limits and held fast. But deep down, I knew she'd reach out again. She was unpredictable, and there was always the possibility she'd find a way to breach that boundary again. And one day, she did. I was at work when the phone rang. It was an unusual number, but I dialed it out of habit. Hello. Hey, it's Sophia, said the voice on the other end. I felt a knot forming in my gut. I hadn't heard from her in months and was unsure what to expect. I held my breath and waited. I know it's been a while, she continued, her voice as gentle as I'd ever heard it. And I understand things have been difficult, but I needed to chat with you. Can we meet? I was unsure what to think. After all that had happened, everything she had put me through, it was difficult not to feel that old anger building inside me. But, as much as I wanted to be done with it all, I knew I couldn't just shut her out. I owed it to myself and my children to hear what she was saying. Perhaps this would provide the closure we both needed. All right, I said, I can meet you later this week, but we need to keep it brief. She consented, and we decided on a time and location, a coffee shop near her mother's home, where I knew she'd feel comfortable. I wasn't sure what her motives were, but I promised myself I'd keep grounded. I refused to let her influence me again. I'd come too far. When I stepped inside the coffee shop, she was already there, seated at a table in the corner, looking nervous yet calm. She has changed since I last saw her. Her clothing were more polished, and her eyes had a sad, worn-down look. I could see the toll her previous experiences had put on her. The injuries from the past remained, but they were emotional in nature, stemming from everything that had gone wrong in her life. Thank you for watching. Do you believe the parent made the correct decision with his boundaries? Let us know in the comments and remember to like and subscribe.